If you're tired of wimpy, muddy bass guitar tone and you're looking to level up your bass tones in your mixes, I'm going to show you how to get some really nice, thick bass guitar tone that sounds like this. Before we actually get into any of the mixing, a good bass guitar tone is going to start off right at the source with a really quality direct signal, a DI signal right off the bass guitar. That means ideally new strings, a properly set up bass, one that's properly intonated and is in tune. This is going to make a massive difference on how this sits in the mix and just the overall quality of your bass guitar sound. We really do want to make sure the tuning is on point, especially when we get into the 5-string bass guitars, because the lower we go, the more volatile the bass guitar pitch can be. And if need be, we could use a tool such as Melodyne, although that's totally optional, definitely not a necessity if you're going for a more raw sound. So now let's actually get into the mixing phase of getting a really thick and big bass guitar tone that's going to sit awesome in our mix and sound good. The way I like to set it up is I like to have a bass sub mix. And within that sub mix, I have 2 additional sub mixes. One is going to be the sub bass. We're going to keep that muted for now. We'll worry about that later on. And a bass guitar sub mix. We're going to focus on this for the time being. I have all the plugins that I'm going to use called up, and we'll go over them. Feel free to swap any of these plugins out with anything that you have. A lot of what I'm going to be showing you, yes, some of the plugins really do help and matter, but a lot of it is just going to be kind of going through my philosophy and things that you could do to get a really awesome skull-crushing bass guitar tone with whatever plugins you have available to you. So within the bass guitar submix, we have a DI, we have a B7K Ultra. This is going to be using the Dark Glass Ultra from Nero DSP. We're going to run it on that track. We have a 5150 track, so this is where you can kind of add like a guitar amp track where you're running your DI through guitar amplifier, and that sometimes adds some cool texture to whatever you're working with. It can add some richness to whatever sound you're working on. We're going to keep that muted. All we're really going to worry about is the DI and the B7K Ultra track, and we're going to split these up frequency-wise. So we're just working with DIs. We're not working with any real amplifiers. As cool as that would be, DIs are much simpler, and it's what I prefer to work with. So we're going to start off with the DI signal. This is just the bass DI, nothing on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a EQ, preferably one that can do linear phase, and we're just going to high pass about 200 hertz. Low pass, I mean, because all we want is the sub frequencies, the low bass frequencies. That's all we want. And now we're going to go over to the B7K Ultra. This is going to make more sense once we finish this, and we're going to load up the Dark Glass Ultra. You could swap this out for whatever guitar amp or bass guitar pedal you have available to you. And the way that I have this dialed in is we're cutting out about 500 hertz because 500 hertz kind of sucks for bass guitar. We're bumping up the treble a smidge, and I'm really pushing the distortion on this as loud as I can without it being overbearing. So it kind of sounds like this. And that sounds really cool. And if we just take off the distortion, it's not as exciting, and the distortion really helps pin the bass in the mix a bit. So distortion comes in clutch. We also want to make sure this grunt switch is in the middle, as well as the attack. You can mess around with them if you want, but preferably what I'm trying to do is focus the distortion on the higher frequencies. I really don't want like the low end getting distorted. That's why we have that DI signal that is just the bass DI, bass frequencies, not distorted, just the low end. And with this plugin, in this track, we're going to do the opposite of what we did on the DI. So we are going to high pass at about 260. It's not going to make or break it, roughly in that area. And it's going to sound like ass. But then when we bring in the DI, we've got this nice complete picture. And we've got that clear low end, which is what we want. So now onto the bass guitar bus effects. I like to run double tap. You can optionally run different plugins. Double tap is just super easy to use. So this is what I put on pretty much all my bass tracks. And really what we're doing is using the low comp to compress the low end. This general compressor to compress all the frequencies. And I ticking back the low end a little bit. You don't want to go crazy. Just a little bit so the low end doesn't become overbearing. And I boosted the output volume a little bit. Just worked for this current tone, and going into the EQ, which is going to be the next plugin. Neutron 3, use whatever you got. This is an older plugin. And this might look a little intimidating what's going on here, but really what's going on, if you look at the frequency curve, I'm really just trying to funnel the bass a little bit more into the mid-range, but also clean up this low end. That's really what's going on. Every bass guitar tone, every bass that you're working with is going to be different. That is the general idea, though, cleaning up some of this low mids, some of the muddier bass frequencies, getting things closer to the mid-range so they kind of poke out a little bit and kind of meld with the guitars a little bit, getting rid of some of this rough, harsh frequencies, and just rounding out some of those really low sub frequencies that most of them you can't even really hear, or sometimes are a bit overbearing with just your stock amp tone. So that's really it for the EQ. Now, diving deep a little bit more into it, we're gonna go start right from left. This low pass, we're gonna solo what I'm cutting out. It's just a lot of nasty stuff. It's a bit subtle. You don't need to go crazy, because once you start going crazier like that, we start losing clarity. You really don't want to go beyond 6,000 hertz in my opinion. Then about 4K, this is just where all of that string clank comes from. And I have a separate compressor that I'll go into later on that's dynamically clamping down on this. So we can further reduce some of that nastiness. And about 600 hertz, a lot of my philosophy with bass guitar tone is getting rid of like what sounds like honk. I guess that's the best way to put it. So this stuff just cuts through the mix in a not so pleasing way. And about 400 hertz as well, we're kind of getting that as well. So I cut a little bit of that out. Some more frequencies that you can pretty much use on any bass guitar tone that you want to cut out. 300 hertz, I'll do it on guitars too. I don't know what it is, but this always like is a problem in tones that I work with. And then 170, this is kind of garbage. It gets a bit overbearing. We remove that. And then just with the rest of the mix, it's just not working. And it's not where you want it, to be as far as low end. So I scoop out a little bit of that. And about 100 hertz, I'm just dipping out a little bit because the low end was just a bit too much for my liking in that area. And then, like I said, rounded out the low end a little bit with this high pass filter. Pretty subtle. Now, ideally, you want to make these moves with the full mix. So it's actually, let me just show you how some of these moves sound with the mix. Actually, reverse some of the moves so you can kind of see why I'm taking them out. So at 300, a little bit more on the subtle side. We remove it for a little bit of clarity. 170. For the chorus. You can kind of hear it. Take it out. Clean things up a little bit. You don't have to go as aggressive as I am. You can leave in a little bit more if you want. But I like to take out a decent bit of that. 100. Maybe we could bring in a little bit more. Just a smidge. I'm all about making sure that the low end, there's a lot of it, but that it's clear. So, feel free to experiment with these frequencies, but the biggest ones that make the most sense to start with is 170, about 300, and then if you start hearing like weird stuff in the mix that's like poking out, like back to 400 hertz. Like, I just didn't like that, and it was poking on a smidge too much for me. Experiment, have fun with it. And some other things you can do that I didn't do with this tone, if you really want the bass to poke out and not be super overbearing, you could try and like boost some of these frequencies. 1K is cool to boost. Just get gentle with it. Don't go crazy with it. There's some stuff like 1500. That could be a bit harsh, so I'd avoid that. 3K sometimes too. We go back to the verse. Add a little bit more clarity if you want. But as it is, that's how I like my bass guitar tones. Sometimes I'll boost 1K. That's probably my favorite area to boost, but I like how this sounds as is. Now onto another EQ. This is TB Fix 4. This is stock EQ my DAW, which is pretty cool. That this has been like one of my go-tos for a while now. And this I'm using to clamp down on 4K. So as you can see, 4K, that area that we highlighted earlier that has like all that string clank, we'll take this out. Bring it back in. And the reason why I'm doing this is so we can make the mid-range stick out a little bit more in the low end, because if we don't take care of all this pick scrape, the string clank, it just sticks out in the mix and it just doesn't sound right. So that's the purpose of that. If we look over here, these are the settings, because we're compressing that 4K area. Fast attack, fast release, feel it out. I did it as fast as I could, except for the attack. I wanted it a little bit smoother. But yeah, real quick, just so we cut down on those really harsh like pick scrapes. If you have a bass guitar and whoever is tracking has the treble cranked all the way on the bass guitar itself, I like to do that for the sake of consistency in case I accidentally bump it. I know where to go, but if that's turned up all the way, that's where this really comes in clutch. So really cool trick if you're working with a pick bass or even just like aggressive finger picking. It's worth it to try and do some dynamic compression on that 4K area. Now, this is definitely optional. This is kind of just a me thing. I like to use Sooth too. I start off with the de-mudding the bass preset, and really what's going on is I'm just trying to clamp down on some of the resonances that can sometimes poke out depending on where you're playing on the bass guitar, especially on the thicker strings when you go higher on the neck. Sometimes those notes will just like jump out in the mix a little too much. So this is kind of just a preventative measure to keep that low end a little bit more consistent. I don't do any low end compression on my master, partly because of things like this. Like I really make sure my low end is in check. And if you do that as well, you won't need any, low end compression on your master. Totally optional though. It's just something that I like to add. If you've got like Neutron 3 like I do, you can mess around with the Sculptor plugin, and that can dynamically clamp down on some of those sub-frequencies as they pop out. Sooth is just a little bit better for the job in my opinion, so something to keep in mind, but totally optional. And to finish things off, we're gonna add a limiter to the end. Really, any limiter should do the trick. I'm using Flatline 2, easy to use, I like it. Default settings work nicely, and we're just kind of clamping down on some of the peaks. This is what's gonna really help pin this bass in the mix. Nothing crazy. So kind of like how we're just trimming some peaks here and there. That's all I'm really looking for. I'm not looking to squash it, because then it starts sounding a little weird. And that is the basis for a really good bass guitar tone. Now let's just listen to this in the mix. And when you're doing a lot of these EQ moves, you definitely want to make sure that you're checking in the mix as well. Sometimes isolated EQing can be helpful, but we definitely want to be doing EQ moves while the mix is going. So now that we've got all that, let's hear how it sounds in the mix. That sounds really good to me. And to illustrate how important distortion is, we're going to go back to the Dark Glass Ultra, remove the distortion. Hopefully you can hear that. And we bring it back in. Massive difference. Really helps meld and blend in with the guitars in a really nice way. And then, you know, if you really want to do some cool stuff with your bass tone, here's some additional things that you can do. So back to the 5150, like I said earlier. What I have is, I got STL Tonality, Josh Middleton. This is my go-to amp for guitars. It's working pretty cool for the bass as well. So I made some EQ moves while the rest of the bass guitar tracks were playing. And I also did a much more aggressive high-pass filter. And now we have this nice little texture from the 5150. So we take this off, bring it back in. This is a nice little subtle thing, and you can boost it, bring it back a little bit. It's a nice little subtle thing you can do. And if you're looking to make the bass stick out a little bit more in the mid-range, this can be helpful. So just a little bit below 0 dB works for me. And it's just some nice, like I said, some nice texture you can add. Add some additional weight to what you're working with. And speaking of weight, let's go back to that sub bass. This is where things can get very, very, very cool. I like doing this. If you have sub bass, virtual instrument or whatever, that'll work. I'm using Sub Destroyer. Kind of just the default settings. I didn't mess around with it too much. And I only have it at certain sections. So like the choruses, the verses do not have it. So really everything besides the verses. And this can just add some nice weight to your low end. And I have a instance of double tap on it that I'm gonna enable now. And it's just, we're just compressing it so it's like, back to what I was saying, you know, I don't have to use a low end, you know, compressor on my master because I take care of, you know, the low end compression well within the mix. In this sub, with the compression, just really add some nice weight to whatever you're working with. So, we're gonna introduce the sub. We'll have it muted. And we'll bring it in. You can push it if you want. Get real crazy. I like just a little bit. Just for some weight. And that's some really good bass guitar tone, in my opinion. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you got any questions, comments, please leave them down below. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you found it helpful, and I hope to see you in the next video.